welcome to this episode of Tips and Techniques video series from Spanner Product Development. I'm Mark Biasotti, and over the next 30 minutes, I'll introduce you to some of my favorite tips and techniques to help you be more productive and create better quality data when using SolidWorks. So whether you're a seasoned SolidWorks user or a beginner, we think you'll learn something new in this series. For your convenience, we've listed the topics in the YouTube description that we'll be covering in today's episode, along with a timestamp for each topic in the video. Feel free to skip ahead to any tip you want to learn more about. This series is being brought to you by Spanner Product Development, a product development company dedicated to creating positive impact in the world, merging innovation, sustainability, and responsibility to bring meaningful experiences to life for over 100 clients. If you want to learn more about what Spanner has to offer, stop by our website at spannerpd.com or email us at hello@spannerpd.com. Now let's get started with this episode of SolidWorks Tips and Techniques series. Welcome to SolidWorks Tips and Techniques Part 1. And over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to share these tips and techniques and try to get through as many as I can. We'll be doing a part 2 and probably a part 3, and over the course of these 3 we'll probably cover about 24 tips and tricks, and I'll try to get as many in as I can. So let's get started with our first example, which has to do with driven dimensions and thumb wheel control. An often overlooked feature of SolidWorks is driving dimensions. It's based for me on the fact that in SolidWorks you delete nothing, you change everything. And that's a real benefit, because then you can go back and if you change your mind, you can revert back to previous design intents. So let's just use this example of this front bezel with this cut in it, and we're going to roll back to the feature where this cut is created using kind of a driving sketch, this one right here. So let's go into this, and you can see that we have a dimension that defines this gap right here by this dimension here. Well, I don't really like that design intent. I would rather it be driven from up here, and also put a dimension right here to increase this gap. The first thing is, I see there's an unconstrained point here on this right plane, and let's go ahead and just make that constrained. And then I'm going to put a dimension in for that. So let's go ahead and put a dimension from here to here. And immediately you can see SolidWorks says, okay, you've overconstrained the sketch. What do you want to do? Actually, I want to leave this driving. So I'm going to click this and then go to this dimension here and make it driven. First, you have to get out of the dimension command. And then once you do that, you can make it driving. And now the sketch resolves. Furthermore, I think I would like to dimension this dimension right here from this edge up here also. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll dimension from here to here. And of course it over constrains. Let's leave that driving. And then let's find out using the solver where we need to kind of unconstrain the sketch. So I'm going to run that, and over here we get a diagnosis and a manual repair. Diagnosis will take a look at your sketch and find what solutions will work for you to make this work. So first solution is delete what I just put in, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go to our second solution, and it says, oh, I need to delete this dimension right down here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and accept it. And so now I have a underconstrained sketch, and it's probably because this is not a horizontal. Yeah, so there we go. So that's a quick way to use driving-driven dimension sketches. The other thing I want to mention is, like when you're adjusting dimensions like this, if you double-click, you get this little dialog with this thumb wheel control. And so the thumb wheel control is really handy when you're modifying things because it's like a spin wheel. So you can go ahead and click on it with your mouse button and drag it left and right, and you can change the increment kind of dynamically. The other thing you need to know about this is right now this is set to increment per the spin increments in your system settings. Let's get this out of the way so you can see that. But if you hold down your Alt key, what it does is it divides that spin increment by 4 and gives you much finer control. If that's if the standard spin increment is not adequate, you can actually hold down the Control key and you can multiply it by 4. So then you get some really wild gross movements. So if you hold down the Alt key, you divide by 4. And then if you get it close to what you want, and I want it to be about 34 inches, then I just go ahead and let go and then type in the exact value. So that is, in a nutshell, how you can use driving-driven dimensions and the spin wheel to adjust your sketches. This next tip has to do with kind of a hidden feature that I don't know if the programmers had anticipated it or not, but I find it very useful, and that is the fact that you can work within features when they're suppressed. And this becomes really useful and evident when you have large patterns. So I have this grill. It's really not that large. It actually, on my machine, refreshes or rebuilds in a decent clip. But in real life, these grills could be much, much larger. In fact, the holes could be smaller and there could be many thousands of them, as is the a recent project I did where that's the case. So what I'm talking about is, let's kind of roll back to this pattern, and you can see that what I'm doing is I'm building 1/4 the model and 1/4 the pattern, and then mirroring it by 4. That kind of increases the speed if you're not aware of that. If you can model that way, it's a good way to do it, and it's more robust. So here I need, the designer wants to change these holes to a smaller hole, and thus resulting in a smaller spacing and more holes. Well, I could edit the feature and do that, but it would take a long time to rebuild and experiment with the hole pattern that I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suppress the feature first. I'm going to then go to the seed cut, and I'm going to change its diameter to 1. And now, with a rebuild, I can go in why this pattern is suppressed. I can edit it, and you can see immediately I get a preview, a partial preview, which is what you want. You don't put on the full preview because it's going to take a lot longer. If you can get by with a partial preview, you're going to have instant type of dynamic change. So now that it's suppressed, I can go in and very interactively change the spacing and increments. So we want the spacing to be more like 1.75 in both the X and Y. So I just changed my increment with moving my mouse control. So, or I put in the wrong value here. Okay, so let's put in 1.75 in both directions. You can see now I need to increase my increment. So let's just do that until we are satisfied. So here I'm interactively changing the increments. And that looks pretty good. And also, you know, while I'm here, I've got to change the instances around this corner that I want it to skip. So I'm going to clear that and then go in here and change those. So I'm going to remove these three. Okay. And then I'm going to, when I'm satisfied with that, I can just say OK, and I get instant rebuild. That's because it's suppressed. So it's a great way to work in suppression. And now that I'm satisfied with that, I can unsuppress it. So now when I unsuppress it, yes, I have to wait for that to rebuild, but I only have to do that once. So that's a great productivity enhancement built into SolidWorks for some of the features that you can suppress. Another one that's really valuable that I use this way is shell, because as you know, shell is very expensive. That is, it's very process intensive, and because it is, and a lot of things can go wrong with shell towards the end of your tree, it's great to work in it in a suppressed way, figure out, you know, what are the remove faces, what is the increment of thickness, what are the variable faces that you want to change, and you can do all that while it's in a suppressed state, and then you can rebuild it once you know that you've got everything correct. And so you can see how long that took. If I had to do that over and over again as I was changing the increments and the spacing, you know, I'd be there for a long time. So so anyway, that's a tip on how you can use features in their suppressed state. And we're going to just let this rebuild, and then you know, it'll take a while, but that kind of drives home my whole point of why you want to do this, because when you have expensive features like shell and like pattern, you don't want to be waiting around for that. Okay, I think I'll end this, and we can move on to the next example. In this next tip, I want to illustrate the use of shortcut keys and the S key. So I'm not a big fan of shortcut keys, mainly because while I was working for SolidWorks, I'd be mobile with my laptop, oftentimes visiting customers, and I didn't want to drag along a mouse that had extra buttons for shortcuts. Likewise, I had a number of space balls, and I never brought them along with me too, because I just didn't want to drag them along. So I tend to use just the basic mouse and keyboard. But there are a few shortcuts that are just super valuable for me, and I want to pass them on. It's really only 2 or 3. I only mentioned 2 here. One is the show hide. So it's under View, Display, or I'm sorry, View, Show, Hide all types. Okay, and it's a toggle, which is really nice. What I've done is I've tied that to my mouse, one of my mouse buttons that you can see here, and if I just click on that, I can toggle on and off my planes and a lot of other reference features that might or might not clutter up my view. And believe me, it can be a lot worse than this, as you well know. You know, the idea of that is that I need to get in here and change a feature. And selection becomes really hard because when it's really cluttered like this, I'm trying to get to that feature, but I have a lot of planes and other reference features in the way. So just by toggling the show hide, I've now made it much easier to do that. So now I know I want to go in and change the profile of this. I'm gonna click it and use my breadcrumbs, which I'll talk about in a future episode, to go to the feature and then edit the sketch. And now I can get to that very quickly, and I've done that by decluttering my view and then getting right to the feature I want without a lot of mouse moves. That's the key. The other useful feature, if you're not taking advantage of it, is the S key. And so the S key is configured for 4 different types. That is, you can configure it for just in part mode. When you're in a part, you get a predefined menu that you can customize. You can also have it for an assembly with different commands, as likewise you can have for drawing. So you have these 3 different types. We also have sketch, which is really valuable. So when you're in a sketch, you have different commands. And these are the ones, this is how I have mine configured that is most useful for my type of work. It will be different for you, and that's what's great, is that you can customize it for yourself. And so by just, and then also I have that tied to one of my mouse buttons so that I can easily toggle it on and off as I'm doing right here. So I'm toggling one of my mouse buttons. As I'm over a feature, I can toggle, and now I'm in part mode. If I'm actually back at that sketch, this one right here, where I went to the breadcrumb and invoked the sketch, now in sketch mode I have, these are a lot of the useful ones for sketch that I use that are shortcut menus. And like I use a lot of fit spline, I use sketch pictures, I use replace sketch entity, and so I have those all there. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that that's just a really great way to be very productive. What it means is that you don't have to come up to your menus that you have up above or on the side or wherever you configured them, but you can be right there where your mouse is. So you can minimize the mouse travel by bringing up the S key. And of course the S key doesn't have to be an S on your keyboard. It can be any keyboard on any key on your keyboard, and it can also be assigned to your mouse. So that's how I use it. This next tip has to do with a feature that came in a few years back called Replace Sketch Entity. It's been a tremendous time saver when working with SolidWorks models, something I wanted for a long time, something ProE's had for ages, and now SolidWorks has it. And if you're not aware of it, let me show you. This is an example model. You can see it's a pretty short feature tree, not realistic. That's why it looks like an example. You know your trees are much, much longer. But for the sake of illustrating this, we're going to roll back to the base feature. And you can see that we have a new sketch from the industrial designer, and basically he wants this top surface crowned a bit. So we're going to go into that sketch and we're going to make the change. And without thinking about it, most of us, well, I'd say some of us, maybe many of us, would go in, okay, we're just going to delete this sketch, just ignore the warning, and start assigning geometry. So we're going to take this predefined sketch, make it construction, and you know, maybe we can keep this guy, just move it down, make it tangent, rebuild, and then rebuild the tree. And we got lots of failed features. So we want to avoid that, and using Replace Sketch Entity is a great way to do that. So I'm just going to reload the model so I don't have to undo all of those steps. Here's the same model again. So let's go back to that base feature, edit its sketch, and now instead, when we go ahead and delete that, let's pay attention to the dialog box. So Replace Sketch Entity is its own feature, and you can actually, it's so important to me that I have it on my S key right here, use it all the time. But what's even nicer is that they built it into the delete dialog. So you know that it's saying, okay, you know there's an association with some child, and are you sure you want to delete this or replace it? And by the way, don't ever check mark do not ask again on this dialog. You'll be very sorry, because you'll never know when you delete sketch entities whether they're associated or not. So I'm going to, instead of just saying yes, I want to delete it, I'm going to click on replace. And that's nice because it already loaded in the entity I want to replace, and I'm going to just pick this entity and return, and now it's replaced that old entity for the new one. I'm going to drag this down and make it tangent, and then we're going to rebuild. And you can see that because we replace that sketch it replaced all of its references that had associated to it and didn't have to fix anything. So great feature to have in SolidWorks for working with models. Continuing our discussion of replace sketch entity, I thought I'd show this example too, which is a good example and good use of replace sketch entity. So I have a failed feature, the split line, and the sketch is failing. So let's go into that sketch, and it's really pretty hard to discern what's going on here, but I see a dimension over here, and I suspect that this edge is this offset entity is supposed to be over here, and it's supposed to be 1.25 offset. I know that because then I check a earlier rebuilt version of this model, and this is what it's supposed to look like. So there is no way to really repair this. If we go in to the overdefined entities and delete them, it doesn't really help our problem. So what I need to do is just create a new offset. And so I'm going to do that by 1.25. And then I need to replace this new entity with the older entity. But before I do that, let me just put in a reference for where these two splines were intersecting. So I'm going to do that. And now I can go in, I can say right click on my S key menu, replace this entity for this entity. And then I'm going to just pull back these vertices, connect these, and then rebuild my feature. And now you can see I've been able to successfully rebuild it. And more importantly, all features that are children on this split line will update correctly, or will update more correctly. Now this tip is continuing with our face tools, delete, replace face. And this is a piece of imported geometry, and I need to use it. I need to go further with it, creating some new features, but I have some features here I need to delete. So I'm going to use delete face, and a good part of this is how do you, we all know that we can do delete face to remove these features, but how can we make it quick, efficient, and not tedious to have to pick all of these individual faces and build up our set to delete? So I'm going to show you a quick way to do that. So we're going to go into our top view, and we're going to invoke the delete face tool, which I have on my shortcut. And then we're going to go into wireframe. Now, the reason I'm going into wireframe is that when I do selection in wireframe, it's going to pick both the forward-facing and rear-facing faces of the model. If it was in shaded, it wouldn't do that. It would only pick what you see is shaded in front of you. So by putting into wireframe, I know I'm picking everything that I put my selection around. And then the other crucial key is I go from box selection to lasso. And with lasso, it allows me to do some very specific selection to be able to remove a lot of geometry at once, and I'll show you how. So I'm going to go ahead, and also it might make sense to use the filters. So I'm going to use face filter, and by starting here outside the model and lassoing carefully around these areas, we're going to remove all of this geometry at once. Let's see if it works. Okay, so it's gathered up the faces. I have it on delete and patch. And sure enough, we're able to remove all of those very quickly because we've used the lasso. So let me clean up some more of this model. I'm going to speed up the video and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back and I've cleaned up this model the way I want it to be. So let's continue to delete some more features so that we can build our new features on top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and invoke the delete face command again, and I'm going to pick these fillet features. I can't pick select tangent because it would pick all of the walls, so I have to, like I just did, I'm just going to pick those. And so let's see if we can delete those. Yes, I'm going to hit the enter key on my keyboard again. You might have heard me doing that quite a few times on the sped up video. That's also another tip, is that when you're doing a lot of repetitive commands, remember your enter key right after you do your feature. If you hit that, you can re-enter the same feature. And so that's what I was doing. Let's do the exterior fillets. And okay, now we have a problem. It's saying it can't do it. And I suspect it's because of the way this fillet bleeds off into this other face. It can't really resolve that. So like, well, SolidWorks is a great tool because there's many different ways to do the same thing. And fortunately for us, there's another way to solve this problem, and that's using replace face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this face, and I have that again on my S key, and a copy is really just offset by 0. We all know that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that face as a definition and replace it with all of these fillet faces, and let's see if that works. So another thing too to know is with replace face, if you don't do anything past making that copy, it automatically populates it as its reference surface. So I went right directly from making an offset into replace face. This makes it very quick to use. And I'm going to have the replace faces be that fillet. Come around here, and then I'm going to hit OK. And there you go. So let's hide the reference face. And so what it's really done is it said change the definition of that fillet to this back face. And that's how we can use it. I have noticed though, if you turn on display with visible edges, you get a remnant edge here. And if you really want to clean up your model, now I think you can go in here and just do a delete face on that with delete and patch, and it should clean up. So just know if you really want clean models, that's the way to do it. The next features I'm going to show you are associated with what are called the face features. Face delete, replace, move, copy, heal is another one. I'm going to show you how you can use these and how I use them when I model. So we have this shroud right here, and it has a failed shell. That is, this whole interior back part is going to be removed and reflect this underside. But it's not working, and I suspect it's not working because of this variable fillet that I put into this area. Let me turn on my tangent edges. You can see that I've just applied a variable edge fillet, and because I have such a small radius here and such a large radius here, the transition is very odd. And to try to tweak it would take a lot of time. I don't want to bother with that. I like the resultant 40 millimeter radius here, and I like the beginning radius here of 10. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that, and then my plan is to clean up this intersection here on the corner. So let's roll back to that point, and let me just show you the solution so that I have in all of these example models, and we'll roll through it. So I'm going to roll back through that to where we were, and my plan of attack is to basically modify just this area. And the way I've done that is to create some new split line geometry. So this first split line is viewed from the front, and I create a conic that spans from this vertice down to this one and splits this face, so I can have a more natural transition from the small radius to the large one. I've done the same on the other side, and I've tied a relationship to those row values. And with that, I've used that sketch to actually split that face. Okay, with me so far? So we're going to do another one, and the other one is on the bottom. So we're going to go to our, well, let me go to the sketch first. And fit the view. Okay, and we just have to flip the view to the bottom. And I've done a spline here that's tangent to this current edge, and then made this vertex coincident with this, and then horizontal. And then when I go ahead and do a split on that, I'm now splitting this face. So I'm doing that on both sides. It would be better if this So now what I have is some outer boundary geometry to use the delete face feature. And when I use this feature, I'm able to select these faces. So let's just start again. The reason you didn't see that change is because I was on the other side over here. And what I do is I just gather up those existing faces, and then I'm going to add these faces. And then I take it off the default setting, which is delete and patch, put it on delete, fill, and tangent, and with that, it will try to fill in that area to be more smooth and eliminating this inner geometry. So when we do that, we get something that looks like this. And it works best if all of your outer boundary are meant to be tangent. Let's do the other one. We'll just roll forward through that. You can see how that works. And now with that, we've got a much cleaner solution there. And also the added benefit is that my shell will work. So I'm going to go ahead and shell it. And now this is what I'm really trying to get after. And I knew that intersection was the cause of that. So that's how you use the delete and patch.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We hope what you've learned has been informative and can help you to excel using SolidWorks day to day. You'll see below some links to example models used in today's video. Feel free to download them and explore these techniques at your own leisure. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Please email me at the address you see here. If you need help on your design project or just want to know more about us, stop by our website at spannerpd.com or email us at hello@spannerpd.com. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.